Welcome. I have the pleasure of speaking today with Władysław Teofil Bartoszewski, a member of parliament from PSL-Polish Coalition Party. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, good morning, or good afternoon. To us, good afternoon. To you, good morning, I think, more or less.
Thank you. So let's talk about current Polish politics. What is your stand on the ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal restricting the abortion law, followed by the mass protests of citizens from October?
That was I'm very negative about this move. Poland had, since 1993, had a compromise solution, which was when to accept the abortion, and that compromise didn't necessarily satisfy everybody, but it was exactly what it said. It was a compromise. It allowed. First of all, it allowed the choice. The number of abortions undertaken in Poland is not huge. According to the statistics, officially, the ruling of Constitutional Court would have prevented in 2019. There are no data for 2020 yet. In 2019, it would have prevented possibly 1,074 abortions, which is not a huge number in a country of 38 million. Of course, there is some evidence, although not measured properly, that there are more abortions performed either illegally, there's no way to measure that, or people go abroad to perform abortions, largely in order to maintain anonymity. Because if you live in a big city, it's not a big deal. But if you live in a small town and you don't necessarily want your neighbors to know that you had this procedure, but nevertheless, its number is not a staggering one. There is a well-known saying amongst the legal profession that if you are a barrister and going to go to court and ask a question, you must know the answer to it. You don't ask questions to which the answer is not known to you. It's a rule which they teach you at law school in every university. In this case, it was perfectly known what an answer of Constitutional Tribunal will be. That's why the question was never asked. And Lech Kaczyński, the late president of Poland, the brother of Jarosław Kaczyński, the man who effectively runs Poland, who was a professor of law and a traditionalist, and certainly not a mad left-winger and socialist, said that compromise is a just one, and for God's sake, do not meddle with it. Because he knew that if the question was asked directly, they would be very difficult for the Constitutional Tribunal to pass a different ruling than it did, and based on the Constitution. So the better was to, as the Shakespeare would say, let the sleeping dogs lie. Do not meddle, because you create a crisis. And this is exactly what happened. Nobody wanted it, apart from a bunch of somewhat fanatical pro-lifers. Nobody wanted to do this change. And when the Constitutional Tribunal passed the law, the reaction was spontaneous and very strongly against it, exactly because the majority of the country, according to various polls, prefers the compromise. The key was not that a massive number of Polish women want an abortion. That's not true. It's nobody really wants to do it. Sometimes people feel they have to do it, but no, it's not like a mass movement to do that. However, all the people, especially all the women, wanted the right to choose. And the protests were about that, the right to choose. And lots of people, lots of women who support the ruling party went to march outside because that right to choose was taken away from them. And that is why the reaction was strong. And I fully support these women. I think it's a wrong thing to do. Now they're trying to figure out what to voices from the ruling coalition, which come out to say that, well, we made a mistake, but that now nobody knows what to do with this. So That's what I said. Sometimes, as people say, don't start opening a Pandora's box, because you'll end up in trouble. You cannot put the gin back in a bottle.
How could the social tension resulting from the decision of the Constitutional Tribunal be resolved?
The only way, as I see it, and we propose that in Parliament, the only way to do it is, first of all, we have to wait past the pandemic, because you cannot do anything much during the pandemic, and then do the public hearings like it was done in Ireland in a similar case, and after the public hearings, organize a referendum. For the people to vote, and that referendum result should be binding. And then, in the meantime, one could, if there was a political will, pass a new law which brings back exactly with small changes the law from '93. And if that law is not then challenged in constitutional court, and if it is challenged, the court doesn't have to hear it straight away, because that's the way it's done, the law will be valid. In other words, you bring back the compromise for a period of 12 months or so for the pandemic to cease, to stop. Then you do public hearings, you do public debates, you do a referendum, and then you abide by it. And that is the only route to bring some kind of social cohesion. Now, having said that, it's in 2 years, there will be 50 years of division on the same subject in the United States of America. Roe versus Wade was passed in 1973. And that division in America between pro-lifers and pro-choice continues to this very day. This is a very serious matter, and it's very difficult to satisfy both sides into this agreement.
The argument between political sides is increasingly hostile. The nation seems to be divided. What do you think is the root of the problem?
Well, it's Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, the ruling party, decided to make a political success out of polarization of society, and that's they've been doing since 2015 very successfully. So it's us versus them, and the them can be various undesirables, be it LGBTQ plus community or refugees, of which there aren't hardly any in Poland, or the Germans or whoever else. And so we are against, they are against us, and we have to defend the nation. And this, of course, created a reaction of some politicians and some people in Poland, which suggests that we have to unite irrespective of our differences, and we have to be anti the ruling party. Everything else is secondary. Well, of course, this doesn't work. We've tried that in 2019, where we went to a Euro election as two blocks. There was one block of the ruling party, and all the opposition united to create another block fighting them. The result was we lost. And the reason we lost is because we did, of course, analysis afterwards. We could not persuade the public that you could have extreme left-wing activists and at the same time having fairly conservative politicians in the same party bloc. It simply didn't make sense. We've learned the lesson, and this is the election which the opposition should have won. The ruling party never won the Euro elections before, because the majority of people are pro-Europe and open and so on, and PiS was trying to present Europe as a danger and a threat and so on and so forth. So it was our election to win. And we lost because the public didn't understand our message. It was, you could not appeal to liberal, liberals may be the wrong word in English, in England, but ultra progressive, redistribution oriented LGBTQ plus openness supporting people and the conservative voters in small towns or villages. It just doesn't work. So we've learned this lesson, and in the next election, the parliamentary election 2019, we split into traditional party groups. And in 2015, almost 13% of votes cast were wasted. And according to the Polish political system, if the votes are wasted, the majority of votes which were not cast on parties or cast on parties which didn't make it to the parliament are divided, but they're not divided equally. The majority of such votes go to the biggest party. So the Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, Law and Justice, got the majority. In 2019, the only 1.8% of the votes cast were cast on parties which didn't make it to parliament. As a result, despite spending huge amounts of money on social redistribution and huge propaganda campaign on public television, the ruling Prawo i Sprawiedliwość got exactly the same number of MPs and they got 4 years earlier. And that was a huge defeat for them, because yes, there are 5 or 6, if you take a speaker, maybe 6 votes. They have a majority of 6 votes. It's 235 to 225, but you need 231 to win in the chambers. But that's a very small margin, and it currently causes the big problems. So, but that division exists. But you have to. But it's not a division. It's not a division between. It shouldn't be a division between peace and non-peace, but between peace and parties which have something to offer, which is not what peace offers, but offers something to different types of people.
How do you envision implementation of gender equality in 21st century Poland?
Well, I think with some difficulty, like everywhere else. I'm completely in. A few days ago, we celebrated the creation and voting in the first modern Polish constitution after 123 years of Poland not existing as a state. We celebrated in 1921 the so-called March Constitution. The March Constitution, being a very liberal and egalitarian, one of the things it guaranteed equal rights for women in Poland, and including electoral rights. So women, and including non-persecution of homosexuals and so on. It was an equality of people irrespective of this religion and ethnicity. It was a very liberal constitution, and as a result, a number of Polish women were elected straight away into the Polish parliament, both lower and upper chambers. So that was, I would say, very progressive, and I think it was a right approach. There is equality under the law, but there still, for instance, exists economic inequality. There's still women are paid less than men, and I see no earthly reason why it should be like that. It's completely unacceptable. And of course, women, modern women, face an additional problem, because virtually a huge majority of them work, and yet they have to take care of the household and they have to take care of families. And their life is made very much more difficult than that of men. And we, but we know there are certain things we can change. Some years ago, the leader of my party, who was a minister for social affairs in Labour, guaranteed a longer maternity leave for women, for instance, and paid maternity leave for women, and also paternity leave, so the women can work and men can stay home. And I mean, there's plenty to be done, but it's been a long struggle, and not only in Poland.
Are the authoritarian inclination in Hungary and Poland a threat to the EU?
Well, Poland and Hungary are going in a very authoritarian direction, and that direction has to be deplored. We have no. I mentioned in the March Constitution of 1921. The Constitution was formed on the Montesquieu tradition of tripartite of power, division of powers between the executive, the legislative and the judiciary. And this countries like Hungary and Poland are trying to change this division of power, which is a key to democracy, and that cannot be accepted. You can be more left-wing or right-wing or centrist or liberal or socialist or whatever. I have no problem with any of that. But the basis for democracy is the rule of law. And the rule of law, which started in 1215 in England with Magna Carta, has to be maintained. And absolutely, cannot be any tolerance of people who said, I like, as a minister of justice, to control the judges or to control the prosecutors. This is absolutely not acceptable, because that is, the democracy ends there. When the minister can tell the judge how to pass a sentence, and himself is not bound by any law of the land, that is where democracy ends. And there's no question, one has to oppose it, and we do everything here to do it. And we're trying to discuss how to stop this destruction. And of course, the problem with the EU is that they don't have many mechanisms, because it's like you join a club and you say, we obey by the rules of that club. But if you stop obeying the rules, normally you can be expelled. There is no mechanism in the EU for expelling any member state. And it even is very difficult for a member state to leave, because as you could see with Article 50, it was not necessarily easy for Britain to do Brexit, because nobody knew how to do it. But at least there was an Article 50. There is no article for expelling other member states, and nobody quite knows what to do. And yes, there is Article 7, which has been unsuccessfully used for years against Poland and Hungary, and with zero results. Now they're trying to use Article 2 of the European Union Treaty, but it's not very successful. So yes, one has to be worried about it. But I think the most things have to be done in Poland and Hungary themselves rather than in Brussels, because the Brussels has a limited, even the European Tribunal in Strasbourg has limited powers.
What should be the EU's approach towards Russia, Belarus, and other post-Soviet states?
Well, for the first time since 1945, the borders of a state in Europe were a European state was invaded, and the borders were changed. That happened in Ukraine, and it happened in Crimea, which is also part of Ukraine. And you cannot just accept it. You cannot just accept it, and you cannot say, okay, well, this is Russian sphere of influence. There are some politicians in Europe who says, oh, well, this is, let them do whatever. It's, the Russians, they suffered a lot in the Second World War, so they can do whatever they want. Well, no, they can't. The reaction should be like Joe Biden's reaction, who called Mr. Putin. I didn't see the interview. I don't know if he used the words assassin or murderer or whatever, because I only read the Polish translation, and that is ambiguous. Yeah, but it's obviously that what happened to Mr. Navalny was state-sponsored attempted murder. What's happened to Mr. Skripal was state-sponsored attempted murder. And you cannot have a civilized relationship with a country whose president authorizes such actions. I lost a friend. Boris Nemtsov was a friend of mine. I've known him for years when I lived in Russia. We lived in the same building in Moscow when he was prime minister or acting prime minister. And he was killed in front of the Kremlin, gate to the Kremlin. And it was obviously done by the state security organs, because he was the only serious contender, because he was an insider in politics. He was in a circle of Boris Yeltsin. He was a governor of Nizhny Novgorod. He was acting prime minister, and he was a serious threat to Mr. Putin, so he had to be eliminated. There's no way we can have a normal relationship with people like that. And as for Belarus, Belarus is a rogue state which exists only thanks to the financial help of the Russians, who had falsified the election. The election was not approved by any democratic states in the world. And the will of the people is obvious. President Lukashenko, who is not a president, should go, and they should have a normal elections. And the EU governments should have a tough and consistent line towards people like that. Now, I understand it's much more difficult. It's easy with Belarus because nobody cares about them, because they have no international standing, so to speak. And it's more difficult with Russia with nuclear missiles and quite a lot of muscle. But you have to be firm. And so far, thanks also to the German steadfastness, because not everybody in the EU, not every big country in the EU is that inclined, we have sanctions against the Russians, and now these sanctions have been strengthened by the Americans because there's proof that the Russians meddled in the presidential election of Joe Biden versus Trump. And it is correct. They do various cyber attacks in various places, including the Netherlands, in England, for instance. And and that has to be resisted. There's no question about that.
Let's talk political fiction, the future of Polish politics. What direction is Polish politics taking? In which configuration the opposition should run to maximize their chances of success? Who should lead the opposition?
There is no leader of the opposition. We don't have a British situation. We've got theoretically, we've got a few parties in parliament, but if you start looking at the parties in parliament, the ruling party is in fact a coalition of three parties. The Platforma, the biggest opposition party, is a coalition of four parties. Well, three kind of bigger and one kind of smaller. The left was a coalition of three parties, and now two of them are going to merge. So there'll be going to be a coalition of two parties. We, as a Koalicja Polska, also have, well, one big member and then a couple of smaller groups which are part of our coalition. So in reality, we've got something like 11 or 12, and Konfederacja, in extreme nationalist party, is also split into groups. So in effect, we've got some 12 different parties in parliament, which are linked together because the electoral system in Poland favors larger groups. You get severely penalized. We don't have a first past the post system, which kills smaller parties like in Britain. I remember the days when Liberal Democrats would get 25% of the votes and get 10 MPs. So that was, you could say it was quite unfair. But of course, we have to take it into consideration while voting. At the moment, there is a lot of upheavals on the political scene because especially in the ruling coalition, because the ruling coalition consisting of three parties, they started to disagree on various things, and two junior partners started voting against the senior partner. And because the majority, as I said, in parliament, they've got 235 members, and they need 231 to pass any laws. If a smaller group takes 6 or 8 or 10 members out of the voting, all of a sudden they cannot pass the law. So becomes slightly dangerous. And there were situations where the smaller parties voted against the governments, and it stopped the law being passed. Now, the opposition is also split because within the groupings, not so much in my coalition, although we had to let go one of our coalition partners who voted against very serious anti-European law, and we had to say no, we cannot support that. So, but otherwise we are quite cohesive. But others are not. So they vote. So there's always a danger that the votes can go different ways. And there is a new phenomenon, which with an emergence of a television presenter, Mr. Hołownia, who created his own movement and ran for president quite successfully, getting a very good third place in the running, which 13 or 14% of the votes, which was significant, and started creating his movement, and now managed to persuade a few members of Polish Parliament to join him. So he has a small group in Parliament, and he will be a factor in the elections, which will probably take place in 2023. Of course, it could have a snap election, but snap election at this time would mean that people who are in power would endanger their positions and would endanger their jobs. And lots of problems here. One of the particular problems in Poland here is that there are some still nationalized or partly nationalized industries, and the jobs in very large companies, and the jobs in these companies are very well rewarded, and lots of people linked to the ruling party likes to have those jobs. So lots of people would suffer if they lose. So I think, barring an unforeseen event, they'd rather stay together. What happens is a very strange realignment, because, for instance, we have been talking about the European Fund for Reconstruction, post-COVID reconstruction. A very large sum of money is coming to Poland, but the government would not discuss how this money should be allocated and spent. And so we in the opposition say that is not acceptable. We need to know exactly where the money is going to go. Otherwise, the money is going to support the ruling party and not the country, not the state. So the biggest opposition party, the Civic Platform, and us said we will vote against it, because unless we know how the money is spent, we are not going to vote for it. And but it appears that the left decided to form an alliance with the ruling party, because the ruling party is, in effect, is not a right-wing party. It's a completely wrong description. The party is socialist or statist, or in terms of redistribution of wealth, and they don't care where it comes from. What they care is who it goes to. With some nationalistic twist, but that's not right wing. It's not a conservative party, let's say, about the right wing. It's not a conservative party. So the left can live with some of that program, because the left would like to redistribute money they don't have. That is a very typical socialist approach. And so it appears that they are willing to vote with the government, while the government coalition would partly vote against. So it's a very peculiar situation. There is a possibility of strange peace-left alliance. That might sound outrageous, but I can see that there may be tactical alliance. The one thing is fairly obvious. There is no leader of the opposition, and the talk that we should all unite together and be anti-peace, anti-law and justice party is crazy, because this is how we will not win the election. We can win the election if we form two logical blocks. One is center-left and one is center-right, because people who vote conservatively, who would have voted for Tories in England, are not going to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. And I'm sorry, and there's no way to persuade them to do so. And we've got some people on the left which are like Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, there is one party called Razem, Together, which are basically slightly Trotskyite. I mean, this is pretty extreme left, and it's no way people who are conservative would have ever dreamed of supporting that bloc. So we are suggesting, let's do two blocks: one center left, one center right, but both united around the democratic principles of division of powers and accountability and so on. And that we have to have a program, because you cannot say vote for us because we are not the law and justice party. You have to say, vote for us because we offer you something, apart from obviously this democratic behavior that you can accept. And that has to do with the health system, which is in a very poor shape, with education, with help to people who produce the GDP, because most of the people who produce GDP are small and medium-sized companies, and they've been swamped with taxes, 23 new taxes. And our position in Parliament is no new taxes during the crisis. You do not tax people who produce wealth when you have a lockdown and close down their businesses. I mean, this is a crazy economic policy. So you unite people around the program. And then you have the three big blocks going to the election, and then we'll see. But we'll see. There's still a long time before we, of course, form tactical alliances. There's going to be an election for a president of a largish Polish town in the south, Rzeszów. It's some 200,000 inhabitants. And the opposition united forces and supports one candidate. And we've got a very high chance of winning this election. But we support a local councillor who everybody is locally known, have worked in local council for many years, and we can live with him because we support the local government, which the ruling party would like to centralize. And we say, no, you have to decentralize, be closer to the people. So we'll see. There will be such, so will be various tactical alliances, but it's too, but one thing is clear. You mentioned, you asked me earlier about the number 276. That is the mythical number, that it's a number of MPs needed to overrule a veto of the president. But when the head of Platforma, Mr. Budka, suggested that number, he of course said yes, and you are going to be united under me. Well, no, that's not going to happen. That is not going to happen. We are not going to be an addition. Platforma Obywatelska started 20 years ago. My party started 125 years ago. There is a little bit of standing power here, and we are not going to be emasculated by Platforma. So if we manage to overcome this problem, we'll manage to form, as we did in the upper chamber in the Senate, an alliance which is a winning one. The opposition has a majority in the upper chamber.
Imagine we are now in 2023, when Poles will cast their votes both in local and parliamentary elections. What is the future of Polish politics? Who is going to win?
I'm not a prophet, of course, but I can tell you with a high degree of probability that the largest number of votes, probably around 30% of the votes, will go to the ruling Law and Justice Party. They've got a steady base which is not movable, and which does not listen to, doesn't use much social media, and if they use their own platforms, listens to public television, which is a propaganda tool. It's not a BBC, it's now a propaganda tool of the ruling party, and impervious to all arguments. But 30%, it's not enough to run the country. Even with the system, electoral system, the DONT system, which premiums large parties, in order to run the country, you need to get closer to 40%. And even then, certain conditions have to be fulfilled. And of course, like in England, nobody ever wins over 50%. It's just not achievable. But in the first past the poll system, 40 guarantees you a huge majority, 40%. So they will have the largest party, no question. No, but it is not obvious they will form a coalition, because their ability to form a coalition is small. Why? Because all the others have completely different views. For instance, theoretically, they could form a coalition with Konfederacja, the party which is a mixture of absolutely libertarian free marketeers, James Stuart Mill on drugs. I mean, complete freedom of individual. I mean, more libertarian. I mean, really extreme. Plus nationalist. It's two different groups. It's slightly peculiar, but they certainly will not vote. They would go with the Law and Justice Party. So that vote, that's kind of right wing, slightly extreme or more, fairly extreme, is not going to sit with Law and Justice, and they can probably get around 10% of the votes. So it's securing them easily a space in Parliament. And the other parties want, could we go with the Law and Justice Party? Well, with great difficulties, because they've been saying for the last 5 years that we should be eliminated from the political scene, because some of our voters could go to them, because my party is a center-right party. So some of our voters could, and some did vote for peace. But for us, the key is what we started to talk about. If you don't have a division of powers, we cannot form a coalition with a government which wants to subjugate the justice system. This is not going to happen. Nobody from our members is going to agree to that. So they have a problem, because they don't want to resign from this destructive policy. And yet, if they don't, nobody is going to deal with them. So of course, then you start a very difficult coalition discussions on the opposition of how to, because we also have very different views on especially economic matters, and not so much on law and justice. I mean, or not on the organization of the justice system, but on economic matters, we've got very different views, from the very socialist to fairly Thatcherite. So it's a quite difficulties to put it all together. And as you know, the coalition governments are hellish. Even in England, it was not a great success, and there were only small number of parties both times. But in Belgium, there was no government for almost 2 years, and frankly, nobody noticed. But it's impossible to predict. Now, there is one possibility. I mean, two possibilities. One is that Mr. Hołownia brings his new party, Poland 2050, into Parliament with a substantial number of members. It could be 40, it could be 50. And then there are two scenarios. Either we make a deal with Mr. Hołownia and before the election, and we form a center-right, big center-right grouping, influencing the policy of any government, or Mr. Hołownia puts 40-50 MPs in the parliament, and Law and Justice bribes half of them with jobs, like happened in the last election, where Mr. Cookies brought in, I don't remember, some 60-something members, and half of them immediately left because they were offered positions in the government. Because there were not people who were, if you create a party for the purpose of winning an election, and that party exists for a year, it's very difficult to have control over whom you recruited. You don't know these people. The Law and Justice have had members for a good decade, if not more, some of them for 20 years, and they know who they are, and they know who can be trusted and who cannot be trusted, and how they're going to behave. But if you create a party in a rush, like Mr. Cookies did, he ran in a presidential campaign in 2015, got 20% of the votes, created a party, and 6 months later, the party was elected to Parliament. But did he know the people who were standing for him? No, he didn't. And that's why he lost most of them. So if Mr. Hołownia does that scenario, then PiS gets incentives for some members of his party, and then PiS rules the country. So that is a possibility, because that is a big unknown. But if the left goes together with Platforma, because Platforma Civic Union turned sharply left, so if the left goes with Platforma and we go, say, with Hołownia and Mr. Gowin, who has a party a kind of pro-business party now linked to law and justice, but he's not going to be on the electoral list of law and justice in the next election for sure, due to conflict within the party and within the coalition. So we could go together, and then we could have two strong blocs, and these two strong blocs could form a government.
It was such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I don't know if any of that was of any interest to people, but it's quite, especially the Polish politics are very peculiar and very fluid at the moment.